It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Let's talk about, when we're talking about financial resolutions, goals that you're trying to keep, here's the second thing that we see, investment planning. And here's why I want you to focus on this. You do this right, and I really do think it could skyrocket your success and what your investments can do for you in the future. And this really will take your investments to the next level.
And I think the resolution normally goes something like this. I work so hard for my money. I spend so much time. I do so hard at work. I'm ready to figure out how to make my money start working for me.
So I think we ought to cover a few things. Okay. I love this because when we were doing pre-show planning, all the people who aren't in the industry hated this slide, but I think it's worthwhile to bring it up. But it is one of those things. I always like one of the valuable tools. When you're in the military, they have an after-action report where you're supposed to look back and kind of see if there were some learning opportunities or things you could have done better. Your investments can kind of be the same thing. I want you to look at your investments and ask yourself, how did they do last year? Did they reflect what, my risk profile, all the things I have going on when I want to retire, my financial profile? There's all kind of things that can go into your plan, but a lot of people are missing this. And let's talk about specifically investments and how the Callan periodic table can also help them.
Yeah, I think one thing that we see so often, and this is a great year when we look at it, one of the things I think that folks do is, if last year was a really, really good year, our natural human reaction is, oh man, I need to double down. I need to pick up the risk. I need to go chase the hot dot. Or if last year was a bad year, we say, oh, I don't want to go through that again. I'm ready to batten down the hatches. Well, we use this illustration all the time, and it's kind of small on the screen. If you're out there in iTunes world, we'll kind of explain this. What you can see is it is a grid, a periodic table, if you will.
Yeah, that's why it's designed to look that way.
This shows a number of different asset classes, and they're color-coded. And this shows 1999 all the way through the end of 2018.
It's the special 20th anniversary edition, Bo.
That's exactly. It is the 20th anniversary edition. It shows how all of these different asset classes performed relative to each other. And what I think is so interesting, and we always ask folks, and we asked Reby this in show prep, hey, pick a color. What's the first color you see? And what she said to us, I see the light blue. And I think the light blue she was talking about was real estate in this example. And what you can see is depending on when you were investing in real estate, it might have been the shining star in your portfolio, top performer. But what's amazing is how quickly you can move from a top performer in your portfolio to not a top performer year over year. So if you're someone out there chasing the hot dot, trying to recreate something that happened last year, you may be setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, this is another. We use this as a tool when we're talking to people about asset allocation too, because I think it is very common. Bo, you said it. Behaviorally, we like to go what feels comfortable, and usually what feels comfortable is what did good last year. But as this chart shows, I never want people, because so many words and letters on this thing, really the big focus, like when we throw this up at a 401k presentation, is what are the colors and how are they bouncing around, because it just shows you what was worst performing last year might very well be best performing next year. What was great for 2 years in a row might be riding the bottom of the curve for the next 4 years. So be very careful and just going with what's comfortable of what happened last year.
So we think that if you're going to think about designing a portfolio and how to pick investments, you don't want to base it on what the best performers or worst performers of yesteryear were. You really want to think about your personal circumstance. And one of the things we talk about all the time when it comes to individual circumstances are risk tolerance versus risk capacity.
Yeah, I mean, risk tolerance is how much can you handle? And let's face it, entrepreneurs, real estate developers, and real estate investors, they usually have a high tolerance for risk. But we always, when we throw out the word, so people know that term, because I think the investment industry's had the 10-question questionnaire, suitability.
What is your risk tolerance?
All those things for years. Would you do this after a market downturn? Everybody knows risk tolerance. The one that I always see people kind of like, huh? What is he talking about? Risk capacity. Explain to them what risk capacity means.
Yeah, so risk tolerance is how much that will allow you to sleep at night. Risk capacity is how much should you actually take on. You may not get nervous about market downturns at all. If the market were to lose 50% tomorrow, you're going to sleep like a baby. But if you're someone that's 1 to 2 years away from retirement and you need that portfolio of assets to provide an income for you, you don't have the capacity for that much risk in your portfolio. So you have to figure out how to weigh those two together. We see this all the time. You already said it with business owners. High tolerance, and even though their tolerance might never change, your capacity absolutely is something that will change through time.
If you've won the game, why are you still risking it like you're 26 years old? You don't have to do it. So that's why we talk about both components, risk tolerance risk capacity. And then here's something that kind of ties into risk, but it's also asset allocation and other things, is that investing is the type of activity that does not reward you for reaction time.
Oh, that's so good.
I mean, well, think about it. Because so many things, video games, sports, it's all about hand coordination, athleticism.
How quickly you can
and reaction time is very important. Investing is just the opposite of that. You actually need to be ready on the front end, because if you're reacting, you're doing it wrong.
That's exactly right.
So we talk about, you need to make sure, I've already talked about risk, but you also need to take into account your age. What does the asset mix need to look like? All this stuff needs to be done well before the poop hits the fan on the economy. Because if you are looking at things and reacting to it, you didn't have your plan structured correctly.
So then the next thing that we think about once we get past risk tolerance and then risk capacity is we're thinking about, okay, what's my portfolio look like? What's my asset allocation look like? But then we can even take that a step further and look at not just my asset allocation, what's my asset location look like?
And this is big because nerdiness, I've practically turned you into a CPA from hanging out with me in my tax background.
Say it ain't so.
I mean, it is osmosis, tax edition. But it is one of those things where we've realized, and this is one of the biggest things, I love target retirement funds because they get the asset allocation right. But tax location is so important. When we talk about this, we're talking about, how much do you have in your after-tax money in your brokerage account?
Yep.
How much do you have in your tax-deferred accounts like your retirement account, your 401k and other things? And how much is tax-free like your Roth? And what's great is if you build this stuff up, you can kind of manipulate how much you pay in taxes, especially throughout retirement. And it's also important even in your high peak earning years, because it lets you do some tax planning so that you're not distributing so much income while you also have high wage income. Tax location is really powerful and one of the ways that I think we add a lot of benefit to clients.
That's exactly right. We talk about it all the time. You can't really control what the market does. You can't control whether your portfolio goes up or down. Based on your asset allocation, you control how much of that you participate in. But in our view, there's really only two things that you can control. You just hit on the first one, it's taxes. What you pay in tax and how efficiently you're structured. We think the second thing that you can control when it comes to investing is what you're paying in fees.
No doubt. I mean, think about this, and the market's changed a lot on this. Commissions versus no load. Because a lot of mutual funds, and I think people, we are in a changing world. We just did an Ask the Money Guy on how free is changing things, because it used to be just commissions versus no load. Now we've got index funds, and we even have zero investments.
That's right.
Investments that don't have minimums, they don't have trading costs. It's just incredible how the world is evolving, but you can now control how much you pay in those fees. Internal operating expenses, Bo. You've heard me share, when I started managing money, this is 20 plus years ago, it was like, the average was like 1.5%.
Which is sort of mind-boggling for me to even think about, 1.5% just for internal operations of a mutual fund.
Because B shares were big back when I first got into the investment marketplace, it was not uncommon to have mutual funds with internal operating expenses, annual ongoing expenses of over 2.5%.
Unbelievable.
And now that seems like heresy. You just don't, you'd be like, oh my God, they'd run them out of town. And then transactions fees. All this stuff has changed so much. You can control how much you're paying in fees, so pay attention to it.
That's exactly right.